Music history. When I said those words, what were the first things that came to mind? Maybe a professor from your gen ed music appreciation class with a stiff starched collar, a dusty old book, a vague memory that it was a Jeopardy category the other night, because chances were it probably was. Well, I don't blame you, but I'm here today to erase all those images. I want to show you that music history is relevant and exciting, and that all of us, whether we know it or not, participate in it. So buckle up. We're going to dispel some stereotypes. And before I do that, allow me to just briefly flesh out some of these so-called misconceptions. I think it's tempting to think of music history in either one of two ways, what I like to call onion theories. Here's the first one. The music itself is on the outermost layer. To get to music history, we have to dig deeper past a casual listen. We have to peel back a layer of the onion and get nerdier about the piece. Of course, if we peel back the next layer, that's when we get to music theory and analysis, so looking at chords, tonality, and a bunch of other complicated stuff. The second one portrays music history as a nice accessory, but certainly not a necessity, perhaps something that even takes away from music's organic charm. Now, music theory might still help us to relatively get a grasp of a work, but music history, not so much. It's taking it a little too far. It's extra credit. Now, there's nothing particularly harmful about these two ways of thinking. As with most stereotypes, there's a grain of truth in each. But I think they do all of us, any music listener or anyone who cares about history, a deep misservice. When these onion theories artificially separate the music from its story, the story being the music's larger historical context, our ability to fully appreciate both is hindered. You see, music and its story are inseparable in nature. They work completely in tandem. These onion theories flatten out the music. They limit our perception and appreciation of a work to a single people, when in reality, the story, the history, is a dimension of the music itself. You can't understand the music without understanding the story. So let's explore this new way of thinking, using history to immerse ourselves in music's fullness. I know we just did some trivia, but we're going to do another one. I'm going to give you 3 clues. I want to see if you can guess who the composer is. Complete deafness, family troubles, a mental breakdown. I'll give you another hint, and I'll actually play you an excerpt from his most famous work of 1874. You want to give it a shot? Close guess. I can see a lot of you were actually doing detective work as that was playing. That's actually Vltava from Love Lost, which translates to My Fatherland, by the Czech composer Bedřich Smetana. What do those flowing lines remind you of? What image does that melody conjure? I don't know about you, but I hear a river flowing through the countryside, growing and free. And that's exactly what Smetana does here. He evokes the stunning Vltava, or in German, Moldau River, that runs through Prague and the heartlands of his native Bohemia. But is that all? Is the story of the music just of nature being a source of inspiration? Well, let's look at the bigger picture. At the time, the Czechs, Smetana's people, lived under the rule of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Czechs, along with other ethnic groups in the empire, along with their language, culture, institutions, you name it, were marginalized. Their political autonomy basically stripped. You see, all his career, Smetana used music to revive his national heritage, often working in mythology, landmarks, and famous figures from Bohemia's history into his music. And this piece is no exception. He works in the landscapes of Bohemia. This piece is a love song for his country. And circling back to his personal story, remember at this point, Smedna was completely deaf and at the beginning of a devastating and ultimately fatal mental decline. Shut out from sound and losing a grip on life itself. This was the life and voice he gave his people and land. What a moving story, right? There's nothing dusty or dull about that. It's really true. The story opens up a whole new dimension of the music to us. And something beautiful about music history is that not every story needs to be as dramatic as Vltava's is to be moving. In fact, the mundane and ordinary can work just as well. Chances are you've heard of this man and some of his music, which might have gone something like this. That was J.S. Bach's Orchestral Suite No. 3. It premiered in 1730, believe it or not, at a local popular cafe. Doesn't get more down-to-earth than that, right? But most importantly, Bach was the father of 14, soon to be 20 kids. Coupled with the fact that he grew up an orphan, you can imagine that Mr. Bach was quite preoccupied with getting bread on the table. Bach at the time was working in Leipzig, Germany, as a music director for a number of churches in the area. And he was subject to some pretty ruthless deadlines. For most of the year, he was writing new church music for every Sunday's service. And one wrong move, and his bosses were happy to kick him out. So no organic writing process where Mr. Bach was twiddling his thumbs, waiting for inspiration to strike. Let this picture of a hardworking, busy father, commandeered by superiors and up against some deadlines, color your appreciation of this excerpt. And for all us students out there, it's a great reminder of how pressing deadlines can be an inspiration in themselves and lead to something incredible. I know, that story isn't as romantic, captivating, or glamorous as Vltava's, but it has its own unique dignity and charm, right? Could you ever listen to that music again in the same way? That's exactly what music history offers us. For my final example, I'll switch it up a bit. I'm going to play an excerpt from Russian composer Dmitri Shostakovich's Symphony No. 7, but before I give you any clues into what its story might be. Not the easiest listen, right? I think for harder, tougher pieces like this one, it's even more important to know the full backstory. It's only with the context that you can begin to crack its shell, never mind appreciate its full worth. This symphony is nicknamed Leningrad. It was dedicated to that Soviet city and was performed there in 1942. Leningrad, 1942, that strikes a bell. Wasn't that in the middle of the notorious 872-day siege by the Nazis? That's right. And to give a picture of just how harrowing the conditions were, musicians often collapsed from hunger during rehearsals, and 3 of them even died before the performance. That heartless melody we just listened to is a terrifying depiction of the ruthless, relentless efficiency of the Nazi fighting machine, one which the composer and his contemporary audience unfortunately knew all too well. To add to the gravity of this piece, Recall that in 1942, iron-fisted Joseph Stalin was dictator of the Soviet Union. Just 5-6 years earlier, his Great Purge wiped out political opponents across the nation. Most historians estimate at least 750,000 were murdered. Shostakovich is alleged to have worked in his anti-Stalin convictions into this piece as well. Yes, that melody we just listened to, those rattling drums, those screeches, are unsettling portraits of the horrors of the Nazi invasion, the enemy on the outside. But they're also directed against Stalin, the oppressor within. Or as our composer is said to have said himself, Leningrad in 1942 was what Stalin destroyed, and Hitler nearly finished off. And Shostakovich's Seventh also gets at my next point. So far, we've seen a lot about how music history unlocks the next dimension, a whole new dimension of music. And as much as that's true, music in turn offers us a whole new set of possibilities to understand history and people. As much as the story serves the music, music serves the story. For music is our portal, our gateway to the past. We just listened to a piece that became the lifeline of a war-torn city, a piece that moved them to tears. And suddenly their unspeakable grief and suffering are no longer theirs only, no longer faint nor distant. The music opens up the vivid ambience of a place and time with its full weight, aura, and unspoken messages. Listen to the next iteration of this theme. Can you hear the brutality of machine guns and dive bombers, hear the wails of outrage and sorrow, and feel the fear? This music is the closest we can get to time travel. Through music, we can truly imagine and experience history. And most importantly, music allows us to own and participate in history. Take a look at the collection of events on this slide. Some are noble, others not so noble. Can you guess what common thread runs through that? A familiar name, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. You see, up to this point, I've talked a lot about how the story of the music is what precedes and what surrounds a work's creation. But music history is also about what follows, the legacy of a work, the tangible changes in history and culture because of music, the impacted lives of moved listeners centuries later, even in remote parts of the world. In 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, musicians from both East and West Germany performed this piece together in a historic concert under one roof. And at the 1998 Nagano Winter Olympics, choristers from across the world sang the chorus of this symphony together via satellite broadcasting, heralding a new age of information and technology while upholding the Olympics' centuries-old ethos of international unity. As you can see, the story of the Ninth is ever growing and continuing. And it's a story that's become my own as well. I think I was around 4 years old when I first encountered the Ninth and absolutely fell in love with it. Here's actually a draft for a music history book supposedly I was planning to write that I found in a childhood notebook. You can see that Beethoven gets a notable mention. Fast forward about 10 years later, and I launched a music history initiative with a nonprofit called the Inception Orchestra, where I get to work with student composers across the U.S. weekly. One of my favorite highlights was February 2023, where I got to deliver and prepare a 2-hour lecture on the Ninth, and deliver it to my students, their parents, and my fellow mentors who logged in from across the world. I sparked a twinkle in their eyes, but that's really because I was just letting Beethoven's genius do its job, which is to change lives. And a year later, here I am, just a month or so before the Ninth's 200th birthday, sharing its living and ever-growing story with you. As you can see, it's a small It's a matter of small but steady steps from that little bedroom to this stage. And so our time together here proves my point. Music history is indeed far from outdated or narrow. It's powerful and immersive. It's our key to participating in history, to experience the past and to shape its legacy. And best of all, how we own our story, how we cherish it and share it with everyone, whether it's our neighbors or the watching world. Thank you.